In this video, we're going to be looking at Clause 6, which is entitled Planning. Now, to many people, this clause is quite complex and can be quite difficult to understand. So what we've done is we've broken it down into various different process flows, and we're going to try and explain it to you in detail. So let's first deal with Clause 6.1.1, which is the risk and opportunities assessment. And here's where it can seem quite confusing. There are two different types of risk assessments or approaches to risk that we'll have a look at in our SHEQ management system. The first one is 6.1.1 is the risk and opportunities assessment. That's where, based on the information from 4.1 and 4.2 within our determined scope, we will identify risks and opportunities. Now, 6.1.2.2 deals with other risks. It also deals with OSH risks. 6.1.2.3 deals with other opportunities and OSH opportunities, but we wanted to take care to show you how 6.1.1 links with 6.1.2.2 to other risks. 6.1.1 also links to 6.1.2.3 other opportunities. So in 6.1.1, that is where we determine the risks and opportunities. But let's take a step back for a second. We need to, in these two different types of risk assessments, we need to understand what the receptor is. In other words, what is at risk. In 6.1.1, in the strategic risk and opportunities assessment, the receptors are, or as in what's at risk, is the organization, the SHEQ management system. We talk about undesirable effects or desirable effects, and we'll have a look at our products and our services and our customers. So let's be clear on that. In that the 6.1.1 risk and opportunities assessment, the receptor, as in what's at risk or what could be the recipient of the opportunity, is the organization, the management system, the products and services, and the customers. In 6.1.2.1, we look at hazards, we look at aspects, we look at impacts. So for the risk assessment in 6.1.2.1, the receptor is the human being, is the potential for injury and ill health, or the environmental aspects and impacts. So there's two definitive lines in terms of the risk assessment approach within the planning clause of Planning 6. So let's have a look in that in a little bit more detail. 6.1.1 risk and opportunities, we're looking at the organization, the management system, the products and services. Now the clause requires that we assess the risks. So we have a look at various different criteria as to how we can determine it and assess its significance. So the first thing we have a look at is what are the risks and opportunities to the organization. Then we assess the risks. What is the significance of that particular risk to the organization, the management system, product, services, or customers? That's in 6.1.2.2. In 6.1.2.3, we assess and estimate the opportunity. So what is the opportunity to the organization, to the management system, to the products and services? So 6.1.1, the strategic risk and opportunities assessment, focuses on the management system, the organization, the products and services, the desirable and undesirable effects. So that particular assessment, please note here that when they refer to other risks or other opportunities, that links into the 6.1.1 strategic risk assessment. So let's now move over to the other type of risk assessment that many safety, health, environmental and quality people, particularly the safety, health and environmental people, will be accustomed to. So 6.1.2.1 asks us to identify hazards. Now the definition of a hazard is, I always like the old OSHA 18,000 definition of, it is the source, situation or act with the potential for injury or ill health to the human being. So the hazards there, the receptor in terms of ISO 45000 is what are the hazards to the human being. In 6.1.2 we would also have a look at, in the ISO 14001 standard, we would have a look at what are the environmental aspects and impacts. So from 6.1.2.1 in 45,000, we move through to 6.1.2.2, where we now assess the OSH risks to the associated hazard. We've identified what is the source of injury or ill health. We now assess, we have criteria, we have methodologies for assessing the risks and determining the controls. So 6.1.2.2 OSH risks links to 6.1.2.1. Then we also have a new clause that we'll have a look at in ISO 45000, which is 6.1.2.3, which is entitled OSH opportunities. So what are the opportunities? And these opportunities, OSH opportunities, are different from other opportunities. These other opportunities are opportunities to the organization and the management system. These opportunities is how can we improve the process to benefit the individual. So an example would be a highly human interface process where there's a lot of carrying and lifting, and that could be replaced by a conveyor belt. So yes, that does introduce additional risks, but it's an opportunity to improve and reduce the hazard exposure to the human being. So 6.1.1, strategic risk and opportunities, we assess other risks, we then assess other opportunities. With the 6.1.2.1, we identify hazards and aspects and impacts. We then also assess the risks and determine the controls, and we also assess OSH opportunities. We then move over to 6.1.3, which is legal and other requirements. Depending which standard you're looking at, it can also be determined as the compliance obligations. So the requirements there is the organization should identify all legal and other requirements, so legal requirements and some of the other requirements that it's determined in 4.2. It shall identify them, it shall make them available to their employees, and it shall maintain those legal requirements. Now, one interesting part to note here is that during the 6.1.2 hazard identification aspects or impacts, you may identify issues in this assessment which then become at a strategic level to the organization. So 6.1.2.1 can speak to 6.1.1, to the strategic risk and opportunities assessment. The same with 6.1.3, the determination of legal and other requirements. You could identify something there that also then pulls through to the 6.1.1 strategic risk and opportunities assessment. So what we want to show you here is that this assessment, where the receptor is the organization and the management system, or this risk assessment, which looks at hazards and risks and aspects and impacts and OSH opportunities, and also legal, pulls through to 6.1.4, which is planning action. So before we take action, we want to plan for it. So based on the outcome of the assessment in 6.1.1, based on the outcome of the assessment here of other risks and other opportunities, based on the outcome of the assessment of OSH risks and OSH opportunities, we then plan action. What are we going to do to further mitigate the risk, or what are we going to do to leverage the opportunity? We also want to take cognizance of the emergency plan. So unwanted hazardous events that we've identified over here in the risk assessment that could become potential emergency situations. So 6.1.4 is how we consider the hierarchy of controls in the management of risk to further reduce our risk profile. Now 6.1.4 also pulls through to 6.2, which is the objectives. Now in the objectives, we need to determine what we're going to do, who is going to do it, when and how. We need to identify the objective. We need to have SMART objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-framed. We also need to speak to, when we set objectives, we need to determine the resources that are required to achieve those objectives, what infrastructure we need, what people, what finances, etc. could be a few keys to the identification and then delivery on those particular objectives. Also, 6.3 in ISO 9001:2015 deals with change. You may consider building a change process here at 6.3, or ISO 45000 has built change into clause 8. So you can consider putting 6.3 change in your clause 6 planning processes, or you could build it into your operational processes in clause 8. But what we wanted to show you is the direct link between the information that you've identified in clause 4, 4.1, 4.2, how it determines your scope, and how that information from clause 4 pulls into your clause 6 risk assessments, be it a risk and opportunity strategic assessment where the receptor or what's at risk or what could be exposed to the opportunity is the organization or the management system. Clause 4 also pulls through into your hazards, risks, environmental aspects and impacts assessment. It aids us in identifying the legal and other requirements. Once those various different assessments and identifications are done, in 6.1.4 we plan action. How can we leverage the hierarchy of controls to mitigate the risk further? So we hope that summary of Clause 6 planning helps you to understand what could be quite a complex clause and breaks it down into its individual processes, and we link the various different numbers.